to political analyst Professor Dirk Kotze, who now links up with us from our Pretoria studios. Prof, thank you so much for joining us. Now, we spoke to you yesterday. Is there any significant observation you have made in the political landscape between then and today?
Well, I think first of all, last night was obviously very significant with the resignation of President Zuma. And today is a completely new day, and the new leadership of the ANC has moved very swiftly to elect President Ramaphosa now and his inauguration. And I think what he also did is to give already a bit of a preview of the culture of leadership that he wants to establish. And I think, as we've seen now, how he emphasizes the idea of being a servant leader and servant leadership, and being therefore not acting on his own interest and all those other matters that are by implication a reference to President Zuma. So though he did not refer at all to President Zuma, I think the presentation that he made was to distance himself to a large extent from President Zuma and the leadership that he established over these years. I think what is also important that it reached out to the opposition parties, and he referred to the fact that very early in his term as Deputy President, he already established in Parliament a committee of all the different political parties, all the opposition parties, in order to promote cooperation between all of them. And he indicated and he committed himself that he wants to start with this again. And I think then, on a more lighter note, today was also his last day in Parliament, because as President of the country he must resign as a Member of Parliament. So what we've seen today was, in a sense, his farewell speech also as a Member of Parliament.
Prof, the EFF walked out of a swearing-in ceremony, or the swearing-in of President Ramaphosa, saying Parliament was illegitimate to elect him. What's your view on their action today?
Well, I think the dilemma for the EFF in the near future now is the absence of President Zuma. And President Zuma was a unifying factor for the EFF since its inception. And now, to some extent, the EFF will have to redefine themselves or reposition themselves. And one way of doing it is now to say, well, it's not about President Zuma in the first instance, but it is about the ANC. And this is the new message that has emerged over the last number of days by the opposition party, and that is why they are calling for the solution for Parliament to be dissolved, and then that the general election must be held immediately. Is that they are saying it's not about the leadership of the ANC, it's about the ANC as a political party, and the governing party. And therefore the EFF was, to a large extent, tried to be consistent with that. And I think, while in the past their call was for President Zuma to resign, or first for him to pay for Nkandla, then thereafter to resign as President, this call for Parliament to be dissolved, I think, is going to be the refrain that we are going to see from the EFF for the near future, in order to be able to find a new target or new focus, which disappeared with the absence now of President Zuma.
Just looking at the action from the EFF earlier today, their walkout of the assembly and the different messages from opposition leaders once President Ramaphosa was sworn in. What do you think is going to happen going forward? You just mentioned the fact that the EFF have to basically redefine themselves and look at something else with regards to something else to focus on going forward. Messages from opposition leaders, there was a call for the replacement of some cabinet leaders. What do you think the first point of order of President Ramaphosa will be? Will it be replacement of different ministers? Will it be a cabinet reshuffle? What are we likely to see after the SONA tomorrow night?
Well, I think the SONA speech is now his first priority, and he's most possibly working on it at the moment, because he has very little time to put his own identity on and his own approach to leadership into the SONA speech. Most of the SONA speech would have been completed already before today. But I think given the fact that there's so much expectation from a new Ramaphosa presidency, he will most possibly have to introduce some aspects or some new focus areas right at the last moment. And then soon after that, next Wednesday, will be the budget speech. So I think these two will be the first priority. But at the same time, we know now that there's actually a vacancy for the deputy president. So the rest of the cabinet can continue for the meantime, but even there is a huge expectation that he has to move quite swiftly in order to deal with ministers who are regarded as very close to President Zuma, or who were not very effective as ministers also. So those will be a very important expectation, is that he will have to define who's going to be his new team of ministers, his new cabinet, and that will give us a good indication of what will be his approach. Will he, for example, bring back some of the ministers who have been dismissed by President Zuma, like Pravin Gordhan or Dirk Kotze and others, or is he going to introduce new ministers who haven't been before in the cabinet, and that he might see as new up-and-coming ministers? Is he, for example, going to appoint Lindiwe Sisulu as the deputy president, or Naledi Pandor, who was his preferred nomination before the national conference? So these are all matters that will give us a very good indication of what are the preferences of President Ramaphosa, who are the type of persons he wants to involve. Does he want to bring persons back in order to reconfirm or to confirm or to develop more confidence? Like, for example, a very important choice will be the Minister of Finance. Is Malusi Gigaba going to continue as minister, or will he bring back Pravin Gordhan as minister, or will he use him in another capacity? At this stage, President Ramaphosa has given no indication of who his preferences will be.
Prof, you just touched on something that's very key. I was just going to speak to you about the budget speech firstly with regards to Minister Malusi Gigaba. Are we likely, as you say, going to see some changes? And within that short space of time, considering the fact that just from today up until Wednesday, the expected day for the budget speech, which will not be changed, will there be any changes, and will the changes be good for the country at that point in time? There has been a lot of speculation, especially on social media, especially after this morning's picture of a photograph on social media of President Ramaphosa with the longest serving finance minister of the country, Trevor Manuel. So a lot of speculation taking place. Is it even a possibility that Nhlanhla Nene could be brought back into the fold? Are we likely, it's very exciting times for South Africans with regard to speculation and, the rumor mill. So if somebody like you could just sort of give us guidance as to what do you think the expectations are? Is Malusi Gigaba going to deliver that budget speech, or are we likely to see somebody else do it?
I think first of all one should say that the content of the budget speech has most possibly become finalized already. It's a long process to prepare a budget. It normally starts in October of the previous year. So a lot of input has been put into this, and therefore the content of it cannot really be changed now. But the point is, who's going to present it? Who's going to be the new minister? Who's going to be the one who personifies the budget? I think at this stage Malusi Gigaba is most possibly the person who's going to do it, but it's never impossible for surprises, and there's quite a number of possible candidates. I think a very strong candidate will be the former Minister Pravin Gordhan. Then the others are not members of parliament, but that does not exclude them. Nhlanhla Nene, for example, is not at this stage a member of parliament, but two ministers in the cabinet can be appointed who are not members of parliament, and therefore there is scope, there is the opportunity to bring persons completely from outside parliament into a cabinet. And therefore I won't necessarily exclude it. I think there might be the possibility that, for example, the former Minister of Finance, Pravin Gordhan, can even be deployed ultimately to SARS, because SARS is one of the state institutions which very urgently need very serious reform. We've seen over time how SARS has been pulled into the political domain and how it has been abused for political reasons, and the lack of capacity that developed, or the lack of ability to increase that revenue is of a serious concern, I think, to everyone, and most importantly to the members of cabinet and to the president, I presume. So a lot of focus is required in that respect. So over and above the Minister of Finance, these institutions like SARS I think definitely require urgent attention. So my expectation is that for the meantime, Minister Kigaba as Finance Minister will most possibly continue, but soon thereafter some serious changes in the cabinet will most possibly happen.
Speaking of serious changes in the cabinet, is President Ramaphosa going to be able to make changes to his cabinet without fracturing the ANC? There's been talk of the ANC being fractured. There's a bit of division. Can he do this without causing a backlash going further into his presidency?
I think it's going to be a combination of many different considerations. First of all, I think there will be a lot of pressure on him to remove persons who are seen as purely incompetent, who over time have not been successful as ministers, who have gone against court judgments. I think, for example, the SASA matter is a good example of that. Then there are ministers who though they have been part of the Zuma cabinet, will very much continue. I think, for example, about the Minister of Health, for example, Dr. Motsoaledi, there's no reason for him not to continue as a minister, and he has been relatively successful. But then there's one aspect which I think President Ramaphosa can address by or through the composition of the cabinet, and that is the absence of strong persons from KwaZulu-Natal. There has been a lot of talk about that. The fact that there's no one from KwaZulu-Natal in the top 6 of the ANC, the fact that President Zuma has now moved out, means that there's actually no one in the top structures, in the top leadership of the ANC who comes from KwaZulu-Natal. And with the opportunity to constitute a new cabinet, there is definitely the opportunity for President Ramaphosa to incorporate in the senior positions in cabinet persons from KwaZulu-Natal in order to address that deficit that has developed over time, a sense of almost political marginalization, and which has been referred to by President Zuma yesterday when he was interviewed, and previously also, as something that could over time develop into a problem for the ANC. So I think in that respect there are certainly some opportunity for President Ramaphosa to address a number of factors. But ultimately I think what is one of the most important criteria is that he must appoint persons with a high sense of ethical conduct, and who will have high levels of credibility for the public in general and for the ANC also.
Prof, just in wrapping up and very quickly, expectations, what should South Africans expect in the State of the Nation address tomorrow evening by President Cyril Ramaphosa?
I think it will be dominated by the economy. That is, most of the time that's the case. And it will very much refer back to the 8th of January statement, the sentiments that were expressed there about the idea that it must be a new open South African economy must be established, the economy which will welcome investment from outside the country. Also the idea of a social compact, I think, is going to receive attention again, cooperation between business, labor and civil society. I think that the energy matter, and for example the nuclear issue, will definitely receive attention and confirmation that it is not on the cards anymore. University financing, I think, is going to be an important point. And several other aspects about the management and good governance in the state-owned enterprises. That is a theme that I think there's lots of expectations about how the new government is going to approach that. And normally towards the end of the speech there's also a declaration or a preview of what the government is going to do with respect to international relations. There's quite a number of issues in the pipeline: membership of the International Criminal Court, the relationship with Morocco, the relationship in general with Africa. So these are typical issues that are addressed normally in the State of the Nation address.
Prof, we'll have to leave it there for now. Thank you so much for joining us. That was Professor Dirk Kotze giving us an insight into the latest political developments in the country, and he was joining us from our Pretoria studios.